Welcome back, everybody, from their holidays, from the Sukkah, from Simchas Torah, and we resume the words and wisdom of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Tonight, we're on the edge of Shabbos Noach, and I wanted to share with you some thoughts about it, much of it based on the work of Rabbi Yitzhak Alderstein. And Noach, of course, is filled with, maybe the most famous thing in Noach is the flood itself, right? But I don't want to talk about that tonight. You've probably all learned a great deal about the flood in the last few days, right? I want to actually talk about the end of the Parsha, which is the Migdal Babel, the Tower of Babel. And lest you think that the Tower of Babel was a myth, you should know that these great towers were called ziggurats, were quite numerous in ancient Mesopotamia, in what is today Iraq. That they were alternatives in which the priest and the king could rise to great heights, 7, 8 stories high, in order to confer with the gods. So when we read the story of the Tower of Babel, right, we're reading a story that is consistent with, very consistent with ancient history, and quite remarkable. And the Tower of Babel revolves around the creation of new technology. Rav Hirsch writes about it that it really is a symptom of the origins of totalitarianism. And I want to delve into that tonight as we go forward. If you open up your Chumash to in the Stone Chumash, it's on page 49, chapter 11, verse 1. Right? And we'll read in English the phrase. It says, "The whole earth was one language and a common people." That language, of course, was Lashon Kodesh, by the way, and Hebrew. "And it came to pass, when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, which is today Iraq, and settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire.' And the bricks served them as stone, and bitumen served them with kind of lime as mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the whole earth.'" Now, you have to remember where they were coming from, right? They were 10 generations after the flood. Noach was still alive at this point. Abraham was a young man in his late 40s at this point. And the flood was brought about because there was such great disunity in man, that every man was a man for himself, that, as Rabbi put forward, and we've heard from others over the years, that the idea of what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine, which the Mishnah describes as the midah of a rasha, of an evil person, was the midah, the characteristic of all people of the time, with the exception of Noah. And because of this quality of everybody after themselves, and the people had actually, they created Hamas, which was a kind of theft and self-centeredness, and eventually they corrupted even the earth itself, not just themselves, but the earth, the animals and the earth itself, and God had to cleanse it, literally cleanse it, the way he put the earth into a washing machine, so to speak, right? And the waters flowed both from above and below to destroy everything. And we've talked about that. When the generations came out after the ark, after the Mabul, the flood, they had a new sense of, we should never have this kind of disunity. We should have a sense of unity, to be together. We're one language, one people. We need to do this, right? So you would think they had solved the problem of Hamas, of self-centeredness. Now they had a... So this is where we come to Rav Hirsch. Right? Let me read you Rav Hirsch's translation of the same phrase. Okay, he says, "Come, let us build. Come, let us build us. Make bricks, burn for a burning."
Burn for a burning.
Translation we have here is "burn in the fire." Right? It says, "Burn them in fire."
In fire. Yeah.
Right. But if you actually look at the phrase in the Hebrew, we're looking at where is it? Here it is. At the end of the sixth line down, right? It says, no, sorry. Here it is. Nil bena lebenim, right? So it's let us. I think that's the phrase there. Yeah. So the way Rav Hirsch translates it, right, is burn for a burning. The bricks serve them as stone, and the mortar for clay. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city, a tower, with a top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the earth." So, Rav Hirsch's point is, he says, they must have been very proud of themselves. You know, they had invented a new system of building. Up until now, the building you built was dependent on what were the rocks and the clay in the neighborhood. You know, or the skins if you were living in tents, right? But they said, we can artificially build buildings now because we know how to make bricks. And we know, so they were probably very proud of themselves because they created this new technology. And by the way, if you were to build a tower to the heavens, which is a tremendous project, right? Where on earth do you think you would start?
Where would I start?
Yeah.
If I wanted to, I'd probably start on a hill or a mountain, so it's closer to the sky.
They started in the valley.
Okay.
They started in the valley.
Started in the valley.
Which tells you the chutzpah.
Yeah, they started in the chutzpah,
right? And they said, we don't need any help here, right? We're starting a valley and we're going to make it that high.
Soup that high, yeah.
You know? It was once pointed out by an Adam Gadol that to some degree, the mission to the moon, right, was a similar experience, in that it was a time of great disunity in America and a sense of loss of self because of the achievements of the Soviets with their cosmonauts. And America was playing catch up, and Jack Kennedy, I think it was, said that we're going to land a man on the moon, right? And suddenly the whole nation got behind this effort, but there was actually no particular at that time value to doing it. It wasn't a scientific value. It was just a focus of something, a great effort that one has that will focus the nation. And as you know, throughout history, there have been many of those kind of things, more often than not for very evil purposes, unfortunately. You know, nationalism lends itself to that. So this is a point that we're going to come to now. They were not the first to build, but they devised a technology that was a sea change from the earlier days when construction was limited to the number of stones people could locate. These moderns scoffed at such limitation. Why content ourselves with what we find, they argued. We can create what we need when we need it. You understand that these things ring true today, right? We can conquer that which is before us, right? Bricks, our man-made stones, will be a vast improvement over the old order. While we're at it, we can do better and rely on, rather than rely on clay, we can create our own kind of clay, right? Mortar. We don't have to look to see is there clay pits nearby. It's not an issue for us, right? So we won't have any shortage of clay. We'll gear up for large-scale production of bricks, and we're not going to worry about, by the way, there's a problem with this, right? Because you can't make bricks just by putting them together. They have to be burned in a kiln, right? That's how you make bricks, is you cook them into, shape, right? So, and where they were very few trees. It was not it was a quite arid environment. Right? We don't care about that. We're not going to be a problem. Right?
We'll get around that detail too.
We'll burn whatever we need to burn to satisfy our needs. Burn for the burning. This is the point, right? We will burn for the burning. Note the Pesach does not tell us what they burned. It conveys the impression that it didn't matter. Giddy with thoughts of their guaranteed success, they planned to burn anything and everything that was available. We will do all of this in a plain, a place devoid of trees and rocks, and all others have that rocks, and all the other needs that we've needed until now. We'll build the first wonder of the world, or the ancient world. Right? And by the way, you look back on some of these other things that are vainglorious efforts. The pyramids. What is that about, right? Slave labor to build a tomb for one person. It's a great national project, right? God's reaction must strike us as curious. God descended, it says, to see the city and the tower. So, first of all, what does it mean God descended? Like, God, his helicopter landed down the ground? No, it doesn't mean that, right? It means that the idea of building the tower in itself was not an evil thing. To build a building, in itself was not. The question was, what was the motivation? So God's descent is to examine with a fine look, what was in the minds of the people who were doing this. What was their deepest motivation, right? Was there something positive in this, right? We see periodically God does do this, right? It's also a mashal for us in our relations with other people and with our families, everything, is that before we come to a conclusion, right? If God descends to examine the issue carefully, how much more so do we need to, when we can't determine what's in the mind of a person? So it's a mashal to tell us we need to examine carefully, examine anything that we're going to get involved with. We shouldn't be aloof and say, that must be what it is. It merits an examination, right? But when we read their description of what their motivation was, it tells us a great deal, right? They wanted to make for themselves a name, right? So much of what has been wrong with societies and civilization, right, Rav Hirsch, springs from this brief expression. We want to make for a name for ourselves. We want to be the Ubermensch.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
We want to be a superpower, right? All of these kind of phraseologies, nationalistic phraseologies. And by the way, the interesting thing is, what do the Jews say about being chosen? We don't want to be. Everybody has a reason to be here. Everybody's, we're not jumping and saying, look at me, right? Whereas it's a very kind of national trait to do this very often. Want to make a name for ourselves. Now, we know that names are very, very important. We just got finished in the previous parsha of Bereshis of Adam naming the animals, right? And he didn't simply say, let's see, this has some humps, let's call it a gomel, right? No, everything that Adam named was a revelation of the essence of the animal in its name. So, by the way, even more so, Adam himself, right? What's his name mean? Adama means
earth.
Earth, right? He's crafted by God from earth, right? So that's number one. Two is Adam is made up of three words, right? Aleph, Daled, Mem. Adam, right? Aleph stands for Adam, right? Do you remember how long Adam lived?
Oh, 970 years, or 930 years.
930 years.
Yeah, because the 70 went to David.
Second letter in the name?
David. D. Dalet.
Dalet, right.
Yeah.
Third letter in the name?
It's the Mem.
Mashiach.
Mashiach. Yeah.
Encapsulated in the name Adam is the entire history of mankind.
Well.
Adam, the high point of David and Melech, right? And the next high point, Mashiach. Right? It's all in the name. Right? Who are they to say we're going to make a name for ourselves? Right? Names are determined by those who come before. When a child is born, the parents choose a name which they think is appropriate for that child, which reflects the essence of the child. Right? Sometimes people don't even know what they're doing when they do it. You know, a person picks a name, they don't know why they did it, but turns out it's the right name for that person. Right? It's the essence of that person. Here they're saying, you know, we're going to decide what that is. Right? Yeah. Another chutzpah, right? Hirsch now gets into something that's it's a tremendous observation. He says communities are much like individuals, right? They have missions, they fulfill only those missions when they keep God's primary wishes. Right? Both man and communities, in order to succeed, right, they can have very big projects, right? But they have to be consistent with the goals that God has set for us, right, in His Torah. The failure of communities to focus on God, however, is far more dangerous than that failure of an individual. Individuals often learn their lesson, if not sooner than later. Right? By the way, this comes back to something that we learned not long ago in a class of our writers. It says that God holds the hearts and minds of kings in His hand. Right? So what does it mean? That a king, the most powerful person in his country, doesn't have free will? It means exactly that. His free will is less than that of a servant. Right? Why? Because everything a king decides is so monumentally critical that God doesn't want it to be left up simply to the whims of the king.
Whims of the king.
Right? Because it has to fit with His plan. So He will influence leaders of nations to do things that they don't even know why they've come to this conclusion.
Wow.
An individual will learn sooner or later. In the course of a lifetime, many individuals have to confront their mortality, their limitations. Right? Because people live 120 years and they die. Right? So they're finite. Right? Communities need come to no such realization.
No.
They don't have a specific period in which they live. A community, the community of America, the community of Canada, the community of Russia, right? Community of China, right? You know, community of Iran, right? The community of Israel. You know, call Israel, right? Communities need to come to such realization. Communities need come to know such realization because they're invested with real power and vibrancy. They don't have immortality, specifically. A thriving community will not necessarily be brought to its collective knees. Additionally, when communities sense their power, they become ends in themselves. And this is a very key thing. Right? Instead of what they should be, tools to help their members achieve their purpose. Right? You know, a person runs for office. He's not in office. And what does he talk about? Change. Change. Everything is change.
Sure.
Right? You know, hope. We can do it.
Better
right?
than the other guy.
You know, he comes into office, right? And change is not such a good thing because the next change is he's out of office. And it turns out he doesn't like change as much as he likes sheer power. Right? And now we may be getting into why this parsha is this week. Right? Because what we observe in leadership is that they may voice if they're demigods. Platitudes about change and about, but in fact, at the end of the day, right, their own policies in terms of, how their security forces operate, how their real human rights operate, how their favoritism operates, right, is all about maintaining their own power under all conditions, maintaining the power. So they say what they have to say, do what they have to do, manipulate the press, manipulate the economy, manipulate the voters in order, not for change, actually, but for the status quo, because the status quo now is another 4 years. Right? So this is the point, and this is what happens. When communities see themselves as important in their own right, individual rights are quashed and abrogated. The community no longer serves the individual man, but the individual serves the community. Man becomes simply a pawn in the service of the collective nation state. We will burn for the burning. Not only everything, but everyone can be sacrificed. All can be swallowed up by the insatiable need for fame and power. And we know that we see this in totalitarian states all the time, right? Is that, for the fatherland, right? For the motherland, right? Sacrifice, right?
Sacrifice. Yeah.
So, is it sacrificing for a better life? Is it sacrificing for an ideal, or is it just sacrificing for a flag that represents those in power? It's something that has to be examined. Right? Not only everything can be sacrificed, all can be swallowed up by the insatiable need for fame and power. We will make ourselves a name. Right? The power that the community breathes into itself needs to express itself by triumphing over something else. Right? How do we know we're doing well? We beat them.
Yeah, beat them. Yeah.
Because this is what happens when you don't have godly goals. Right? They become other. You still have to have goals. Right? The arrogance of a successful community easily targets the will of God, for whom it cynically decides it has no use. Right,
right away, get rid of
we don't need God.
Yeah, we're doing it ourselves.
Because what does God demand? Right? It's very interesting. What God demands, right, more than anything else, more than the worship of God Himself, right, is He demands civil behavior. He demands human right, menschlichkeit behavior. We often use this mashal, right? Does a father, what does a father cherish more? That his son will show him respect, or that he and his brothers and sisters will get along beautifully? At the end of the day, he would like both. But if he had to choose, it would be that there's harmony in the family. That would be the most important thing. What God requires of a nation state is this respect for humanity, for the citizens of the state. Right? What a powerful community that is willing to live and feed off its own desire for power does is we, the state, becomes more important than the people. Right? That, and we see it over and over.
Yeah, you do see that.
Absolutely. So the arrogance of a successful community easily targets the will of God, for whom it cynically decides it has no more use. Religion is for the weak, they tell themselves. The opiate of the masses.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Marx said the other day. But we are strong. Right? We don't need it. Right? We are barbarians. Right? If the purpose of the community is not serving God as it should be, it must invent its own ersatz goal, its own false goals. The glory of the nation, making ourselves a name. The honor of the state, substitute for the morality and the elevation that could make man happy. Instead, he is taught that he can know no greater purpose than giving his life for the flag and sending his children to the killing fields of wars for vain glory. Right? We see this, by the way, in our enemies sometimes, is that, they're willing to sacrifice, even their most innocent children. Some physically sacrifice and some emotionally and morally sacrifice for a bizarre view of godliness, in which, you satisfy God's need by killing. The builders of the tower had good reason to fear that they be scattered over the face of the earth, because in the end they were. In a proper society, no one worries about the disappearance of the aggregate entity. A proper society seeks only to facilitate each individual's fulfillment of his purpose and moral goals. It has no other purpose, no reason for its existence. No artificial mortar needs to hold it together. The common commitment to doing God's bidding is all that's needed to keep the people bound together. It's not a question of security forces. It's not a question of, we must triumph. It's actually a question of fulfilling the needs of the community and increasing the individual's ability to fulfill their goals. The common commitment to doing God's bidding is all that's needed to keep the people bound together. If, for some reason, a community would agree to disband, no one would mourn its loss. The community is there only for the well-being of the people. When a community decides that it must memorialize and perpetuate itself, it can only mean that it has abandoned its focus on God.
That's interesting.
And replaced Him with itself. When that happens, God and the rights of the individual are both jettisoned, both thrown out. They go together. Right? When you choose a godless society, you choose a society that reduces the value of mankind. The beautiful Medrash encapsulates this, and we talked about it before. The simple contrast in images. If a person fell from the tower and got killed under the construction, no one paid much attention. He could have even been buried in the construction. If a person nearing the top dropped a brick from his hand, people mourned for it. Life became cheap. What mattered was the success of the project. Chazal also identify the leader under whose direction the tower rose. This is very, very important. Right? It's not actually directly in the Pshat, but Chazal understands who it is, and it seems very clear. People like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, understood that people will lay down their lives for a colored piece of ribbon. In the ancient world, the first one to understand this clearly was Nimrod. Right? In the ancient world, Nimrod anticipated their success in whipping up the enthusiasm of the masses. Nimrod was not the first Gibor, warrior, powerful warrior, admired for his strength and courage. He was, however, the first to merge Gibor with Tzezet, the hunter. Right? Nimrod was a hunter, and after him, by the way, Esau was called the similar hunter. But he didn't hunt animals. He hunted humans.
Nimrod.
Using the force of his personality to craftily lure them into rebellion against God.
Wow.
He hunted the soul of man. Chazal teaches us that this, despite the fact that the words that follow immediately are Lifnei Hashem, before God, which ordinarily signifies an activity consistent with His will, not opposed to it. This too was part of Nimrod's diabolical modus operandi, his system. He convinced the adoring crowds that his agenda was pleasing to God. That it was conducted in God's name. Right. And in God's honor. Every politician in the United States ends every speech with God bless America. Right. Nimrod was the first of many to co-opt the language of good in support of evil.
Amazing.
The Tower of Babel, it turns out, was not a strange, isolated incident in antiquity. The tower still stands as a beacon of darkness, encouraging powerful and charismatic leaders to ply their immorality upon the masses of people who too willingly give up their freedom and lives for the glory of the state, the glory of the leader. It is a foreshadowing of much that would follow in the millennia to come. especially in the times we call modern. Now it's interesting because, as you know, when Hirsch lived, he lived in Germany, right? But he lived 100 years before the rise of Nazism, in Germany, right? And yet, his description here is exactly a description of that, right? But it's also, to a lesser degree, descriptions of different ills that we see over and over and over with leadership. And we shouldn't think, okay, if we have a democracy, it can't be touched by this, because as you know, the Chancellor of Germany, his name should be erased forever, right? This Chancellor was elected in democratic election, right? So democracy doesn't guarantee that this scenario won't come about at all. In fact, in some ways, it's a cautionary tale because of the very fact that Nimrod invoked God's will, Lifnei Hashem, right? That Nimrod said, all that I'm doing is in fact godly, right? So, get on board, children, because we're doing a godly thing here. So it means that we have to have a very, the phrase we used at the beginning, God descended to them. We have to look at our world, through the eyes of Torah always, and we'll see. So this is what Rav Hirsch says about Noach, right? And he describes Nimrod and the tower as the rise of the original forms of totalitarianism. Totalitarianism, by its definition, by its word, is not dictatorship. But what it really is you are totally, in every sense of your life, committed to the state itself. There's no world in which that's outside of the state. Spain under Franco was a dictatorship, but there were other power centers, in Spain. There was the church, there were different business clubs, different things that went on. Within politics, you had to toe the line, but there were other things, right? And made Spain more able to recover from its dictatorship than some other countries were able to do. Totalitarianism is what was required to build the Tower of Babel. Right? Every day, every moment was dedicated to the state. Right? We have to be careful, that we don't fall prey to it, and that the lessons of the Parsha should be lessons that we learn as we go forward, and lighten our load and add wisdom to our purpose. I want to again thank, of course, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and also Rabbi Yitzchak Alderstein, who is really the source of this year that we just gave over tonight. Good Shabbos, everybody.